Smartphones and texting have caused many of us to forget that until the early 2000s, complete strangers could call you at any time for any reason, and if they said the right things to keep you from hanging up, you could find yourself subjected to all manner of psychological manipulation. This tale is one in which several calls are featured, but in reality, they are just one part of a much larger story, and try as they might, nobody has ever found a suitable explanation for the bizarre events surrounding the Sudbrink phone calls. Even with all the information readily available, it's often difficult to pinpoint precisely what type of story the Sudbrink phone calls incident is. Is it a tale of government harassment? Is it an example of actual contact being made with extraterrestrial life? Or is it an instance of events intruding from one reality into another? Most researchers tend to agree that the story best fits into a category reserved for encounters with the enigmatic Men in Black. These mysterious figures, so named because they often appear clad in dark suits, have been a cornerstone of UFO lore and conspiracy theories since the 1950s. Amongst other things, they are often claimed to visit those who have witnessed UFOs or other inexplicable phenomena. Though they are usually assumed to be government agents of some description, many who encounter these individuals report that they have strange mannerisms and appearances. For example, they might use incorrect or unnatural words and phrases, or fail to respond to questions the way someone else might. So, where some believe the Men in Black are simply tasked with suppressing knowledge of extraterrestrial life, others suggest they might be extraterrestrials themselves, or at least beings under alien control. And though they are rarely seen together, reports of encounters with the Men in Black have become almost ubiquitous with those of unmarked black helicopters. The idea of these nefarious vehicles became widely known during the 1970s and 80s and were associated with the aftermath of UFO sightings. As the name implies, witnesses often emphasize the absence of identifiable markings, such as insignias or registration numbers, elements displayed even by military aircraft. In some cases, these helicopters are said to possess their own UFO-like features, including low noise or silent operation. Using this element of stealth, reports claim they will fly low over the homes of people who have had recent UFO sightings, chase their vehicles, and behave in other menacing ways. Whilst all of this is necessary to understand the theories regarding the Sudbrink phone calls, the only way to evaluate them is to hear them firsthand. Thankfully, the family had access to an answering machine when these calls were placed. Now, more than 30 years later, we can still hear the actual voice that uttered those eternally unsettling words. Is this Gary Sudbrink? Today's video is sponsored by Aura. So recently there was this period where I was getting so many spam calls. I wouldn't know if the calls I was getting were genuine or spam. Every call I answered gambled with my emotions. It got to the point where I hated hearing my phone ring. But Aura is an app that helps me remove my personal information from data brokers and people's search sites that will sell my info to identity thieves, scammers, and other awful places. This helps because the less data of mine that's exposed online, the less likely I am to get spam. So, Aura monitors my personal data, including my national insurance number, across billions of data points, like the dark web and public court records, to alert me about potential identity theft. After you sign up, every adult on the account, up to 5, gets $1 million in identity theft insurance to help cover eligible losses and fees, with a total of up to $5 million in coverage. I'll get alerted in minutes if my credit file has been compromised, like if someone tries to open credit cards or loans in my name. I can instantly lock my Experian file with a tap on my phone for fast security. With Aura, my data is safeguarded using the same security standards as banks and the military. Plus, Aura will never sell my data to third parties, and they have US fraud specialists available around the clock to help. I get this all in one app at an affordable price. I'm not leaving myself and my family vulnerable to data breaches, and if you don't want to either, you can go to aura.com/bedtime stories and try your first 2 weeks for free. That will be enough time for Aura to find out if any of your personal data is exposed. Like most tales, this one starts before it actually begins. And to fully understand the unsettling nature of these phone calls and their effects on the victims, it's important to know how they tie into a broader series of unexplainable occurrences. The first of these events is odd, but otherwise forgettable. However, when one takes the time to relate it to the messages in the phone calls, a haunting pattern emerges. And it's here that we meet the subject at the center of these events, Air Force Captain Gary Sudbrink. Back in 1992, he was enjoying a drink at his brother Stephen's wedding reception on Long Island. Since he was stationed at an Air Force base in Texas at the time, Gary had spent the past 24 hours catching up with family members and friends. He hadn't even had a chance to speak to and congratulate his brother on his nuptials. Just then, Stephen appeared and began chiding him for his behavior on the road earlier that day. Confused, Gary asked what he was referring to. Stephen then recounted how that morning, he'd been driving out to Long Island for the ceremony when he spotted Gary's car driving up behind him. He described how Gary had then pulled up next to his vehicle and how he had made odd faces and gestures in his direction. Gary then sped off down the road, obviously in an attempt to get to the wedding venue first. After hearing his brother's recounting, Gary took a deep breath. He then explained that he had flown into New York and that the car Stephen had reported seeing was currently sitting in his garage back in San Antonio, so there was no way he could have been on that road earlier that day. Though the two brothers were understandably confused, they both felt that the wedding reception was no time to figure this out. Eventually, the busyness of the day forced both men to move on, but they didn't forget. 1 year later, when the phone at the Sudbrink house began to ring, this supposed case of mistaken identity would take on a terrifying new connotation. February 1993. Gary Sudbrink was looking over his schedule when he realized he had several days off in a row coming up. With nothing to do on base, he decided to take a flight home to see his family. He had been stationed in San Antonio, Texas for some time now, and he hadn't been home since his brother Stephen's wedding the previous year. Though standard procedure dictates that all military personnel inform their superiors anytime they travel, he was confident that he wouldn't be missed for just 3 days. This is important, as the fact that nobody knew he would be traveling from San Antonio to Long Island that February makes the events that followed that much more bizarre. The first strange occurrence happened whilst he was packing for his trip. Alone in his Texas apartment, he was suddenly startled by a loud commotion outside. Of course, as a member of the US Air Force, he knew precisely what the sound was. Heading onto his balcony, he saw a helicopter hovering just beyond his property's fence line, no more than 20 feet off the ground. Whilst helicopters were a common sighting in the town surrounding the base, military pilots knew better than to risk flying so low in an urban area. Even stranger still was the fact that the aircraft seemed to be facing Gary's home specifically. In an attempt to try and identify the craft and potentially report this reckless behaviour, he ran inside to get his binoculars. However, when he returned, the helicopter had ascended and sped off into the distance. But that was just the beginning of Gary's unusual day. Several hours later, he was standing at the airport terminal. His plane had started boarding and he was just waiting for his section to be called. Though he was dressed in his Air Force uniform, he hardly felt like he stood out. After all, servicemen travelled back and forth from this airport all the time. That's why he was surprised when a slim man in an overcoat approached him and began asking questions. The man greeted him warmly and began to ask Gary about his travel plans. In an effort to be polite, he mentioned that he was visiting friends and family in New York. However, he was a bit unnerved by the fact that the man had a notebook with him and seemed to be jotting down the responses. He then began asking more personal questions. He wanted to know Gary's full name, but the Air Force captain declined to provide it. Gary was wearing his ID, but later mentioned that he specifically checked to see if his surname was visible, and it wasn't. Upon asking the man why he was posing so many questions, the stranger claimed to be starting up a small business and was conducting a survey. However, Gary noted that he hadn't seen the man talking to anyone else. He had merely made a beeline straight for him. When he inquired about this, the man simply said, "Don't worry, you won't get into trouble." It was at this moment that the terminal attendants called Gary's section. He excused himself and boarded the plane, happy to be done with the odd encounter. After taking his seat, he was quickly joined by another man with long hair and glasses. Moments after sitting down in the seat next to him, the man struck up a conversation. He too wanted to know where Gary was flying and for how long. At least in this case, it felt much more like friendly conversation. That was until another passenger arrived and informed the man that he was sitting in the wrong seat. The stranger then moved to a seat across the aisle where he continued his line of inquiry. However, a few minutes after this, a stewardess arrived to inform the man that he was again sitting in the wrong seat. He got up, but rather than move to his assigned spot, he stood near the emergency exit, bombarding Gary with questions about his return to Texas and, oddly enough, how he spelled his last name. At this point, the Air Force captain was understandably beginning to feel uncomfortable and refused to answer. As a result, the man finally decided to take his actual seat, which curiously was much further back on the plane. By the time Gary landed in New York, paranoia had set in. Concerned that these men might have been planning to rob his property whilst he was away, he immediately called his landlady and asked her to keep an eye on his apartment. He then proceeded to his family's home. Upon arriving, he spoke to his father about the strange events of the day. To his surprise, his father mentioned that a helicopter had been hovering over their family home that afternoon. It was then that the elder Sudbrink confessed something to his son. Several weeks earlier, he and his brother, Gary's uncle, had taken a trip to West Virginia. The purpose of the drive was to visit the Green Bank Observatory, which had recently installed a brand new 485-foot-tall telescope to replace the one that had mysteriously collapsed back in 1988. Ever since this event, which was attributed to the loss of a gusset plate, the Green Bank area had been immensely popular with UFO hunters. In fact, when the first images of the destroyed dish were published, many assumed that the observatory had actually been attacked by extraterrestrials. The elder Sudbrinks were, according to those who knew them, avid UFO buffs. And as luck would have it, the two men did have a sighting during their trip. According to later statements, Gary did not share his father's belief in flying saucers, and he reportedly dismissed the sighting as a misidentification. Yet, his father remained adamant. Though the father's sighting is often presented as a footnote in the story of the Sudbrink phone calls, this encounter, and the elder's belief in alien life, are crucial to what happens next. After settling in at his parents' house, Gary decided to reconnect with his friend Mike. The two hadn't spoken in some time, so his call was meant to be a casual catch-up. But as soon as Mike answered, Gary sensed that something was off. For starters, one of the first things Mike said was, "You're sounding better already." This comment confused Gary, who had no idea what his friend was referring to. Mike then nonchalantly mentioned that they had spoken on the phone just 20 minutes earlier, and that he'd sounded like he had a cold. This revelation left both men confused. Not only had he not called Mike, but he hadn't told anyone in New York that he was coming to town. Yet his friend insisted that Gary, or someone sounding just like him, had called. As the two started to go over the details of the conversation, Gary learned that the imposter had gotten some details wrong, including the airport where he'd landed. Suddenly there was a beeping on the line, indicating another incoming call. Telling Mike he'd call back later, Gary answered. The voice on the other end of the phone was unlike anything he had ever heard.
Yes. I'll tell you who it is.
Hello?
Yeah. Do you want to speak to him?
It's Gary's Sudbrink there.
Yeah, who's this? Steven? Are you playing games with me or what? Huh? Steven, if you're playing games, I'm going to kick your ass.
So how long are you going to be back from Texas?
Huh?
You're being impersonated by the other voice.
Yeah, this is you, Steven, you idiot. You're pissing me off. Jerk. I'm going to get you on... Let's see what it says. Review. One new call out of area. Is Steven out of the area?
How long are you going to be back from Texas?
Wait, say that again?
You're being impersonated by the other voice.
Wait, hold on. Is Steven out of the calling area or what? What do you mean you don't know? He's in Queens. Well, who are you talking to? I don't know who the fuck.
Hello?
Hello?
Here's Gary's Sudbrink there.
Who is this? Sounds like a freaking robot.
So
Hello?
how long are you going to be back from Texas?
What was that again, sir?
You're being impersonated by the other voice.
Oh, be quiet, Alpha. Sorry, would you see that again? Hello? I'm being impersonated by what voice?
Hello?
Yeah. Hello?
Here's Gary's Sudbrink there.
Yeah, hold on a second. Yeah, what is your question? I'll answer it.
So how long are you going to be back from Texas?
How long?
You're being impersonated by the other voice.
Right. When am I coming back? Is that your question? Okay, there was a break. Hold on. You want to know when I'm coming back to Texas? Oh, is that your question?
So how long are you going to be back from Texas?
How long am I going to be back from Texas? That question doesn't make any sense.
By the other voice.
Okay. I'll be coming back eventually. I can't tell you when. You should know that answer to the questions because you seem to know more about me than I do. You know what I'm saying?
Are you an intergalactic person?
Are you a space alien?
Sounds like he hung up.
I can't believe this.
He hung up, Gary.
See if he comes back.
All right, I'll hang up.
Oh my God, man. I'm calling Mike back.
It's clear from the recording that Gary initially thinks his brother Stephen is playing a prank on him. But as the call continues, the voice's repetitive nature and unnatural cadence begin to unsettle him. Then there are the words themselves. Is Gary Sudbrink there? Always with a slight stutter at the beginning of the surname. So how long are you going to be back from Texas? Finally, the most cryptic message, you're being impersonated by the other voice. Checking the information about the call, Gary determines it's coming from out of the area. This seems odd considering his brother lives in nearby Queens, New York. Eventually, the line goes dead. Still, it's impossible to ignore the coincidence. Gary had just been talking to Mike about someone calling and impersonating him. So, whilst this voice seemed mainly concerned with how long he would be in New York, its assertions that he was being impersonated were undeniably relevant. And it didn't end there. According to Gary's account, the family continued about their business after the first call, convinced that his brother Stephen was playing some sort of elaborate gag. However, just 40 minutes later, the phone rang again. This time, the voice was slightly different, its phrasing slower and more fragmented.
What is your question? Yes, speaking. Yes. Can I answer any questions for you?
Are you back from Texas?
Not back yet, no.
How long are you going to be back from Texas?
Let me answer. First, you tell me, where are you calling from?
This is Gary Sudbrink.
Yeah, why don't you tell me where you're calling from?
Who is this?
What do you mean, who is this? You should know who it is. It's me, Gary. Wait, let me ask you this question. Where are you calling from? Okay, I'll be back. Excuse me? I can't hear too well. Yeah, it is a full moon out. That's true. Could you identify yourself? Identify yourself. Why are you calling me? Excuse me? I cannot hear too well.
Get on the other phone, it's better.
Hold on, let me switch phones. Okay. Okay, hold on. Now, who are you?
Keep an eye in the sky, he said.
Keep an eye in the sky?
Yeah.
That's what Kenny I talked to him.
Shh, shh.
I had a sighting.
Okay, hold on. Say that. Repeat that again. Please repeat.
Okay.
near Orion.
Near Orion. Holy mackerel. Tonight or
The
guess
full
when?
moon.
The full moon? They told
So double from the view.
Repeat.
Tell him I like to talk to him.
Okay, repeat last word. I'm hearing static.
Tell him I like to talk to him.
He hung up.
He hung up.
Hello?
This time the voice asks, "Is this Gary Sudbrink?" A slight variation on the previous question. However, it quickly changes topics, telling them to keep an eye on the skies, whilst repeatedly mentioning Orion and the full moon. The mention of Orion quickly piques the interest of Gary's father, who suspects the call might be a reference to the sighting he and his brother had several weeks prior in West Virginia. One of the last things the voice says is, "Show double of you," before the line goes dead. As strange as the first call had been, this one felt even more deliberate, as though whoever or whatever was behind it was trying to send a message. At this point, the father seems convinced that this call, and potentially the strange occurrences witnessed by him and his brother, has something to do with his previous UFO sighting. This is apparent during the next phone call, when both men are far more insistent about trying to garner information from the speaker. The third call came in late, at 11:38 p.m. This time the voice had several more interesting, and ominous, things to say.
Okay. Yeah, it's taking time from the talk. Who is this? Stephen, this is not funny, you know.
Brian, it's not Steven.
What do you mean, Brian?
I mean, Gary.
How do I know it's not Stephen?
It's not Steven. Hello? I had a UFO experience in West Virginia, which you probably know. And I know that you're into an intergalactic person. Can you speak a little louder? Sir? Can you speak a little louder? Louder?
Let me speak to him, Dad. I guess I don't know what.
All right, I'll hang up so you can talk to me. He wants to talk to you.
Okay. Hello, can I help you?
Hello.
Yes.
You're Gary Sudbrink.
Yes, that's me.
You're Mr. Gary Sudbrink.
Yes, could you please identify yourself? Identify.
Oh, you're back from Texas.
Yeah, I'm back. I'm in Texas right now. Oh, he asked me a question. No, I'm in New York right now. You know that. Why are you asking me such a question? Yes. Stephen, if this is you, I swear to God, I'm going to be pissed. Huh? I'm trying to listen to him. Excuse me? Okay. Eventually I'll be back from Texas. Could you speak more? Please speak more. I guess it's not Stephen. I believe it because I'm getting static.
Not least 3 times.
Let me go on this phone because I can never hear on this phone. Hold on.
Okay. Okay, please speak. Hello?
Keep an eye on the sky.
Okay. Should I go out right now? Right now? Okay, see, I'm not sure where Orion is now, but we'll go outside. It was show double from me. Repeat that again?
Whilst Gary appears to be holding on to the belief that his brother is playing a prank on the family, his father is convinced that the being at the other end of the line is not Stephen. Speaking on the second line, he states that he knows the caller is an intergalactic person. However, the voice seems unwilling to talk to him, and he soon allows his son to take over again. After repeating the instruction to keep an eye on the skies, the voice again says, "Show double from you," though Gary is clearly perplexed as to the meaning of the phrase. At times, the speaker's voice seems to slow to a crawl, as if the mechanism generating it is running out of power. Again, the call ends when the line goes dead, leaving the family with no option but to simply go to sleep. After a tense, restless night, the Sudbrinks were sure that the ordeal was over. This was reinforced when the family went almost the entirety of the next day without receiving any calls from the mysterious voice. Then, at 10:21 p.m, the phone rang one last time.
Yes, this is me. Can I speak to you? Can I ask why you're... Yes, can I ask why you're calling? Can I please ask... Yes, this is. Yes, that is me. Say that again?
This planet.
Leave?
We come
I'm staying right here.
to be within this planet.
Is this a joke or what?
The many to be contact has the same with you.
I have to think about that. I'd like to see you.
The many to be contact has the same with you.
Hey, let me tell you something. I've been listening to you, and I've had contacts with you.
Government interference? You have? Please explain what type of interference. Okay.
Interference. Visitations to be disrupted by them. Appears. Sun will rise from dark side of world. No.
The sun will rise from the dark side of the moon.
Okay, What branch of the government? What should I do?
Government interference. Visitations to be disrupted by them.
Okay. Is that good for me or bad? They hung up.
Yeah.
Right off the bat, the voice seems eager to prove the father's theory. After again confirming that they were speaking with Gary Sudbrink, the voice states, "We come to be within this planet, to visit the many, to be contacted as the same with you." The words and phrases are somewhat nonsensical, and the voice delivers them in an odd, halting manner. It's almost as if they are being relayed by a non-native English speaker who's attempting to translate their words in real time. Moreover, they seem to be accompanied by strange clicking sounds and other audio distortions. The uncle who had witnessed the UFO with Gary's father is also present and attempts to speak to the voice. However, once he jumps on the line, things take a turn. The caller begins warning the family to beware of government interference, which will attempt to disrupt visitations. Finally, it appears to say that the sun will rise on the dark side of the moon. The voice then begins to fade further, becoming almost inaudible. Though they pose several more questions, the line eventually clicks off. This would be the last time the mysterious caller contacted any member of the Sudbrink family. So what are we to make of these phone calls? On the surface, the events do seem like an elaborate prank. However, when one looks beyond the calls themselves, the coincidences are simply too strange to ignore. Supporters of the prank theory often point to the technology available in the early 1990s, particularly the TalkBoy, a popular device that allowed users to record and distort their voices. The recordings made during the calls feature a robotic tone and slowed down phrasing, which align with what such a device could produce. In recent years, researchers have sped up the recordings, revealing a voice that sounds far more human.
Here's Gary's Sudbrink there. Like you're going to be back from Texas. You are being impersonated by the other voice.
This has led to speculation that someone close to Gary, possibly a friend or colleague, might have gone to great lengths to unsettle him for their own personal amusement. But this theory has several issues. A tape recorder, or the TalkBoy, would account for the odd clicks and whirring sounds, but it's worth noting that the slowed down voice function on that device sounded far different to the voice on the tapes, which has to be sped up by around 40% to resemble a regular human voice. The other problem with this theory is that nobody has ever come forward to admit responsibility, not even as an anonymous confession online. Then there are the strange encounters Gary experienced before the calls, the two mysterious men at the airport, the helicopter hovering near his apartment, the doppelganger witnessed by his brother, and the imposter calling Mike, all seem to indicate something far more involved than a simple joke. This has led some skeptics to believe that Gary was actually the one who recorded the voices in an effort to mess with his UFO-obsessed father. Is it possible that he made up the stories of the helicopter, the man in the airport, and the man on the plane, orchestrating the phone calls with some unnamed partner to freak his father out? If so, Gary is quite the actor. It would also seem odd that he never admitted the prank, which, as many have pointed out, is a big part of what makes something a prank in the first place. This is further contested by his behaviour since the events. For instance, he never told anyone about the encounter until he visited a UFO conference over a decade later. Whilst he has conducted interviews in recent years, he has never tried to profit directly from the mystery. Another popular theory ties the calls to UFO phenomena. The mention of Orion, the cryptic references to the moon, and the warning to beware of government interference resonate with ufology narratives. Moreover, many UFO witnesses and researchers, including John Keel, who investigated the Mothman phenomenon, have reported receiving similar bizarre and seemingly nonsensical phone calls. The timing of the calls is also suspicious, given his father and uncle's recent sighting. Why then did the voice only want to speak to Gary? Was it because he was a member of the Air Force? Some theorists suggest the robotic voice might belong to an extraterrestrial intelligence, attempting to communicate using rudimentary technology, or even a human group acting under extraterrestrial influence. Many ufologists believe that advanced alien life doesn't communicate vocally, but telepathically. If true, this means that they would need to use other ways to speak to us. This would account for strange phrasing as well. Even with superior intelligence, one could hardly expect extraterrestrials to understand the many nuances of the English language. This would leave any messages sounding foreign and incomplete. The cryptic nature of the calls has also led to speculation that they were part of a government operation. The references to government interference could be a deliberate misdirection by whoever made the calls. Some have suggested that Gary may have unwittingly been involved in something that drew government attention. For example, his role as an Air Force pharmacist might have placed him under surveillance for unknown reasons, or his father and uncle's UFO sighting could have triggered monitoring of his family. In this theory, the calls could have been part of a psychological operation intended to gauge his reaction or keep him off balance. The presence of the two suspicious men at the airport further supports this idea. The man with the notebook and the overly intrusive passenger both seemed intent on gathering information about Gary's movements, and their persistence suggests something more than casual curiosity. But wouldn't government operatives be a bit less conspicuous? Unless, of course, that was precisely the point. Many people who have had UFO sightings and report run-ins with the men in black describe them as behaving in an over-the-top way that is threatening in retrospect, but not necessarily in the moment. Then there is the doppelganger theory. Remember the way this story started, with Stephen coming up to Gary at the wedding reception and talking about how he'd not just seen him, but also his car on the road that morning. This took place a full year before the UFO sighting and the first phone call, but it could explain why the voice on the other line was only interested in talking to Gary. You're being impersonated by the other voice. Show double of you. Beware of government interference. Mike had told Gary that the voice that spoke to him on the day of the phone call sounded almost exactly like him, but with a cold. Whilst we can't agree on much regarding this case, it's clear that the voice that interacted with the Sudbrinks over the course of those 2 days did not sound like Gary, who has a thick New York accent. This seems to support the theory that he was being mimicked in some way and for some unknown reason. Though it sounds far-fetched, reports of double sightings and mimicry often accompany cases involving UFOs, men in black, or otherworldly encounters. If the calls were connected to such a phenomenon, it raises troubling questions. The most notable is why Gary Sudbrink? After all, he hadn't seen any UFOs. According to later interviews, he didn't even believe in UFOs at the time. Is it again possible that the UFO sighting has nothing to do with the case at all, and that Gary himself is the subject of all these phenomena? We may never know, because as far as we can tell, he never experienced any other strange occurrences. This has led some theorists to claim that there could have been some sort of temporal distortion, a weakness in space and time that allowed a Gary from another universe to enter our own. But even if that is true, it doesn't explain the messages that seem to reference aliens and outer space. Despite nearly 4 decades having passed, it seems we have more questions than answers. The Sudbrink phone calls remain one of the most peculiar unsolved mysteries in ufology, assuming that the case even belongs in that category. With its mix of shadowy figures, strange technology, and uncanny timing, it's a story that blurs the line between paranoia and reality. Whether the Sudbrink phone calls were the work of a mischievous prankster, a government operation, or something far stranger, one thing is certain. They serve as a stark reminder of the many mysteries that still linger in our universe. Bedtime story.